Good morning everyone, and welcome to the third in our series of webinars focusing on the impact that a conscious culture of excellence can have on the energy sector. Now, in our first session, Exceed's Head of Performance Tim Wigham gave us an introduction into how we can all influence excellence in upstream campaigns, especially those that are high risk and high cost. This was followed by webinar number 2, during which our Operations Excellence Specialist Murray McMillan discuss the ways in which we can help production leaders and their teams to unlock potential, reduce cost and increase efficiencies. Now, these are always highly relevant topics, but I guess with recent events, they've become undoubtedly even more so. And as there's a prevailing uncertainty around the future, that can be embodied by a real lack of energy and a low morale amongst teams. So it was no surprise that both those webinars engendered quite a lot of questions from those who attended, and whilst we answered as many as we could in the time allocated, there remained quite a number that were left unanswered. So that's what this morning's all about. Both gentlemen, Tim and Murray, are back, as you can see, and are ready to tackle those questions that were asked previously. Having seen them, I'm pretty certain that they'll be of interest to you whether you attended both webinars, just one or neither of them in the past. But as we're going to focus on previously submitted questions, we're unlikely to get any new ones answered today, but that doesn't stop you from using the functionality in the software to submit questions, because obviously we'll make sure that we continue that conversation with you offline in due course. So let's crack on by welcoming back both our speakers. So good morning, Tim, first of all, how are you doing?
Morning, Rachel. Doing well, thank you. It's great to be back, and as you say, looking forward to tackling some of those questions that were asked at previous webinars and that we just hadn't had a chance to actually give some discussion to. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Murray, I assume you're looking forward to this as well?
Obviously, yep. Good to be back. Looking forward to it, and looking forward to some challenging questions.
Well, that's lucky, because the first one was actually specifically aimed at you. So we'll get straight into them just now. Now, Murray, this came from Orville Cole, who had previously asked, with large national companies, the scope of the need is greater than that of an offshore facility. So how can a large organisation start a continuous improvement process?
Okay, great question from Orville. Yep, it's. I mean, I've had the privilege over the years of working with a whole range of organisations. He mentions offshore facilities, done many platforms over the years, and likewise working abroad sometimes with a small team is maybe as low as 100 people. But I've also had the pleasure of working in some fairly large organisations, and I guess relating to Orville's question, probably the most relevant was a large petrochemical site where we had in the region of about 2,500 people and multiple assets around the site. So I guess the key is, how do you start it? In some ways, the vision will be the same for the whole site. You want that clear vision for everybody. But I guess reality is, don't try and tackle the whole place at once. What we actually did was we cherry picked 2 or 3 key assets, and it kicked it off with them. And I guess when we were doing that, we picked one that we knew was fairly high visibility and it would help spread the word as we rolled out the program and as we saw some successes. But we also made sure we picked one of the more challenging parts of the site. Most places have these sort of dark holes that nobody goes and talks to the team. So we made sure we included that as well. And we sort of grew organically from there. We started small and just slowly spread throughout the entire organization. I guess another key thing we did there, and it's certainly something I would advocate for larger sites, is we made sure we developed a group of internal champions. So these were people that worked on the site, so they retained their day job. But in addition to that, they were the champions for the change program. And these were people from all different sort of roles within the organization. Some were senior, some were very junior. The key thing was they had the passion and the energy to embrace the change program and drive it forward. Where they tend to be very useful is they've got the credibility, the work on the site, people know them, so they are almost more trusted sometimes than coaches and consultants that come in from outside. We certainly work with them and support them, but they're also your sustainability, because they will be there hopefully years and years into the future. So I guess that would be my key things, is have cherry pick a few parts of the site, grow it organically. Don't feel you have to rush. Just go at a natural pace. It'll become obvious when's the right time to move on to the next asset. Make sure you share, make sure you communicate, and keep that same key theme right across the whole site.
Okay, Tim, have you got experience in that side of things with the larger companies too?
Yes, and the additional points that I would make, Rachel, and to add to Murray's answer there, is that there are obvious differences between small and large assets or organizations, between offshore and onshore, and between different industries. But a common element is that any entity has the three components of people, process, and plant, or people, process, and technology. And a continuous improvement or performance improvement initiative needs to initially work with leadership and work with the people in order to then influence process and plant, or process and technology. And of course, digital is a big part of the conversation at the moment. And so, continuous improvement, it's a bit like a marathon. It starts with the first step. The first step needs to be driven by leadership. And a key thing that leadership need to do initially is to listen to the team and to understand from others where the opportunities are to improve. And so there's some commonality between continuous improvement initiatives, whether it's a large organization or a small one. Leaders need to take the initiative, take the first step. They need to listen to the team in order to understand where the gaps and opportunities and the low-hanging fruit. Murray talked about champions. If we can also understand what are some of the bits of low-hanging fruit that we can address to get the team engaged and enrolled, we can actually get an initiative launched and we can progress forward from there.
Great. Okay, thank you both. Tim, before you take a breather, the next question is actually specifically for you, and it's coming from Harold Benning, who asks, post-lockdown and considering the reduction in workforce over the past few years, and I guess any potential further reduction in workforce, what is your opinion on how this affects leadership and therefore performance? And what type of leadership would be required, which I guess you kind of answered a little bit already, both of you, to enhance performance?
It's a great question. It's very relevant at the moment. We're experiencing it at Exceed, the importance of leadership and the importance of performance in terms of what we can continue to do and what we need to focus on. One of the things that springs to mind when I consider this great question from Harold is that leadership continuity is key. And I've referenced on previous webinars and in articles that I've posted before how sports often provide great metaphors and analogies for organizations. So if you consider the New England Patriots in the NFL, or the All Blacks in rugby, or indeed certain football teams, take Liverpool at the moment, good leadership and leadership continuity and succession planning is critical, particularly when you have a black swan pandemic type event like we're going through at the moment with COVID-19. So leadership continuity, I would say, is pretty key. If organizations are seeing a lot of churn at a leadership level, it's going to make it even harder to sustain a strategy which is focused on the long-term purpose and vision for the organization. When there's a lot of churn, we see reduced focus on the distant future and more just survival, and you see more churn, and we change the strategy and it can be a downward spiral. So that was one of the things that occurred to me when I considered this question. Another point is decisiveness, decision making. I think good decision making and decisiveness defines all great leaders. The ability to make decisions quickly and not let them sit in a holding pattern, waiting for someone else to take the decision is a key element of good leadership. And I think it will play a key role at the moment and coming out of lockdown. And if I think about decisiveness, I'm talking about, for example, investment and risk assessment, as well as urgent versus important. Again, particularly important at the moment where perhaps revenue streams have been reduced due to lockdown and work being in suspension mode. Investments are still needing to be made in order to build and be prepared to return post-lockdown. And so that's tied into the risk assessment. I think bold leaders with the balanced paradox between personal humility and professional will are going to be critical. And so people ask me, what does personal humility look like? Well, we're talking there about empathy, vulnerability, approachability, good listening skills, situational awareness, always being interested in what's going on, serving the people or the team. So we're thinking, I often reference the likes of Nelson Mandela or Ernest Shackleton as some fairly well-known examples of what servant leadership and personal humility looks like. I would recommend to any listeners on this webinar, Simon Sinek. He's written a number of books, one of which was called Start With Why, but he's a strong and I believe credible contributor in the space of leadership and its impact on performance. He's gone and researched special forces in the military, high-performing sports teams, as well as high-performing organizations like Apple and others. And he has some excellent anecdotes and pieces of advice around leadership and its impact on performance. So I would encourage any listeners on this webinar to go and look up Simon Sinek. So people say, what does professional will look like? Well, for me, in short, it's grit, it's passion and perseverance. It's that never quit mindset. And that doesn't mean never fail, because we will fail. It's part of growth. It's part of building to success. But Mandela said, we either win or we learn. We don't win or lose or win or fail. We actually learn from our failures. We never quit. We model excellence for others to follow. And so in that way, good leadership modeling will be the key indicator for successful performance. Murray, did you have anything to add to that?
Do you know, maybe just two very quick points. Again, don't forget the informal leaders. So those that don't have leader in their title, they'll be suffering as well. So make sure they're supported and engaged and are driving performance as well. And I guess the only final point, Tim, is, as we all know, leadership can be quite a lonely place at times. And I would imagine even more so just now when everybody's working remotely. And again, that's sometimes the value of the external support or a bit of independent input is actually just, how are you doing? It's almost like that virtual hug. How are you? Because it can be tough, like you say, we fail sometimes as well. And as the leader, yeah, sometimes it's nice just if somebody you can talk to and support them.
Good point. Very good point. Okay, thank you, both of you. Murray, next up, Marisha Jaffrey had previously submitted a question regarding production losses. So I have found in the past that companies only look at the causes for production losses, but there is a lot of potential learning from near-miss production losses. Do you look at this too?
Yes, is the short answer. It's a very good point. It's somewhat similar to HSE, where they look at near misses. Certainly in production, I've worked with many organizations where more naturally you look at the historic loss, you look at something that's already happened and you investigate it, you do your root cause, you find your actions for that. To some extent, the more valuable ones are the ones that haven't happened. So sometimes the control room caught it, or the guys out in the plant did something that managed to avoid it turning into a full shutdown. There's a danger that people just accept that and move on, carry on with the day. There's actually a lot of very, very good learning from these situations. If you can understand how we managed to catch it, but also why it almost happened in the first place. So organizations I've worked with that are maybe slightly more mature in their loss management would look at this, we would call it future losses. So it is, make sure you record them, make sure you investigate them, understand why it appeared in the first place. But there is some very, very good learning in how you manage to catch it. Because reality is maybe you were just lucky, and maybe next time you're not quite so lucky and it does actually trip you and shut the place down. So being able to understand them is very valuable. With I can think of one client especially, we actually made sure we put a value on these things. So for all that hadn't happened, we made the assumption, let's assume it had happened, how long would we have been shut down, how much production would we have lost, put a value on that. And with some almost took it on a little bit further, what's the likelihood of that happening maybe another 3 or 4 times in a year? Therefore, the value is now this. It just helps sort of quantify the size of the prize for chasing it. Again, digging into the root causes, digging into the actions. And again, just a final point in this is it's maybe where one of the great Exceed processes, the after action reviews, adds a lot of value. Being able to just scope out, take that time, understand the whole chain of events, learn from it, and where necessary make some changes so hopefully it doesn't happen again in the future. But yeah, really good question from Marisha. Tim, you anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think, Marisha's a great servant leader and champion of continuous improvement, and really appreciate this question from Marisha. And Murray, listening to your answer, what it reminds me of as well is what we've invested in terms of collaboration. So about 10 years ago, we invested in a cloud-based collaboration platform, iVision, which had a very specific purpose, and that was to logically access and indeed share learnings from one project to another, often within an organization, sometimes from one organization to another. The ability to access lessons learned from other failures, from other rigs, other teams, other platforms, so that we don't repeat mistakes because we've been too lazy to actually access other information about learnings from elsewhere. And I think if we're all honest with ourselves, that we could do more to share learnings. In this case, Marisha talks about near miss production losses. It's exactly the same principle as non-productive time or invisible lost time from one project to another. During readiness to execute, if we can access learnings from previous campaigns, from other teams, this is done reasonably well from a safety perspective, I tend to find, in upstream oil and gas, but it could be improved from an operational perspective, where we can be a bit too closed-minded, focused in on just what the specific team members that we have maybe seen elsewhere, when in fact we could broaden and expand that search and that access to information from what's gone wrong elsewhere to make sure that we learn from that and therefore don't repeat that on our campaign.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And actually, the next question, in a way, kind of focuses in on that a wee bit more about not just thinking about what's happened today and right, that's it, kind of over and done with. And this was a question for you, Tim, from Chris Milliner, asking or saying, performance improvement can often be very nearsighted. How do you ensure team and leadership improvement activity isn't too focused on short-term transactional targets, rather than creating a healthy balance of delivering today, preparing for tomorrow and beyond?
Yeah, very relevant question for 2020, Rachel. As we know, many nations and organizations are being tested to the core of this balance between a clear and compelling long-term purpose and vision, whilst surviving this short to medium-term black swan pandemic that we're in the middle of right now. When I looked at this question, it reminded me of Sir John Whitmore, who wrote the book Coaching for Performance. And John offers a great formula, which is that performance equals potential minus interference. And in order to unlock our potential, we need to reduce the interference, the day-to-day interference, the disruption caused by circumstances often outside our control. So teams and leaders that can manage the interference factor often do extremely well, and they manage to stay focused on the long-term strategy and vision whilst managing that interference in the short term. So leaders that I've been privileged to support have clarity about the purpose, the vision, the mission, the values, and the organizational development strategy for the longer term. They also invest in necessary expertise to help manage interference and to keep everyone on track, sometimes through bad weather in the short term. So, to some degree, we're seeing this play out with the super majors in the energy sector, as leaders are having to commit to transition and transformation towards net zero, carbon neutral, balanced energy resources, and a reduction in focus on fossil fuels, while also needing to satisfy shareholders and stakeholders in the shorter term. I've read a few articles recently, actually, which applaud Bernard Looney, CEO of BP, for providing clarity about BP's new bold vision for the future and providing strong, clear leadership, which should then cascade down and hopefully allow and empower drilling and decom campaign teams to invest in what is needed to deliver day to day, while understanding that in parallel, there are critical investments in tomorrow and beyond that will affect them and their teams. So it's a good question. It's very relevant. And touching on my earlier point about decisiveness, leaders are really needing to steady the ship, keep people focused on the purpose and the vision for the organization. And we're doing that here at Exceed. I'm seeing many other organizations striving to do this as we emerge from lockdown. People are looking for leadership, they're looking for clarity. Once they have that clarity, they have a little bit more stability and security about focusing in on their forthcoming campaign, which might take the next 6 to 12 months, whilst having an understanding that collectively we're pulling towards this bigger picture future, and we're all aligned towards that. Murray, did you have anything to add on that one?
Do you know, I don't think I do. Superb insights as always, Tim. I don't think I would add to that one this time.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I think for the next question, this is one that when we looked at all the questions that had come in, this question was kind of encapsulated in a number of them. So it's not attributed to anybody in particular, but I think if we speak to you, Murray, about this first, morale is already low, which is understandable given a number of factors right now. So how can we convince teams to suggest improvements if they don't actually know if they're still going to have a job days, weeks, months down the line? How do you do that? How do you inspire people?
Yeah, as you say, very relevant just now. I'm sure there's a lot of people struggling just with morale and seeing a clear path for the future. I'd almost turn it around. It can be a massive opportunity. Over the last 20 years, worked with a whole range of organizations and actually worked with one or two in that period that have either been about to be acquired, were at risk of being sold, or at risk of maybe actually disappearing altogether. And sometimes that gives a real sense of purpose. And I guess you always, to some extent, need a reason to change, to adopt an improvement culture, to do things differently. That can sometimes be the impetus. That can sometimes be the driver that gets everybody fired up and understanding, yeah, we can be better. We know we can be better. And that almost is a rally behind the flag for making things different. And I've seen it with organizations that have taken that on board. They've made themselves they've improved their performance, they've been agile, they've got a fabulous culture. So then if it does actually happen, if somebody does come along and want to acquire them, they actually look an awful lot more attractive than they perhaps did a couple of years before. So in some ways, it's a good way to invest in your own future. If you can be part of an organization that has a genuinely strong and powerful improvement culture, that's attractive. That's attractive to a lot of other organizations. We've also seen it in a slightly sort of further down the road point of view from that, where maybe an organization or an asset, we've seen it with offshore facilities, where they're part of a super major, they then move out and they're part of a smaller organization. That is also a massive opportunity. Previously, you've been a very small cog in a huge machine. It's easy to get lost. If you're part of a smaller organization, it's much easier to have that sense of ownership, that sense of identity. So yeah, it can be tough just now when, as you say, morale is an issue. People don't know where we're going, what's the future. But as I say, I would try and turn it into a positive. I've seen it work so many times, get the people fired up. In my experience, most of the guys and girls that work out in these assets and the same folk in the offices, they've got a real passion for the business. They've got a real passion for what they do. They want it to succeed. They want to have a good, positive future. So if this helps them take a little bit more ownership and drive that, fantastic. And I'm sure their leaders would love to have that sort of energy around the organization just now. Tim, for you?
Yeah, agreed, Murray. And if I think about the topic of this webinar, driving a culture of excellence in a transforming energy sector, you can basically never become complacent about the morale of the team. And as a leader, maintaining that situational awareness is critical. And we've spoken to a number of clients and prospective clients over the last year, and you touched on mergers and acquisitions, Murray. We have been approached by and spoken to leaders who are quite rightly concerned about the morale and the performance of teams that are on an asset that has been sold by a super major to a smaller operator in the North Sea and elsewhere, and a concern that that change of coveralls, that change of logo will cause anxiety. Will people retain their jobs? Will there be cost cutting and workforce reductions? So of course that affects morale. And if leaders need to be situationally aware of that, to address it, to listen to the team, to be deliberate about a transition and transformation initiative. We've also supported large organizations who've been bought by larger organizations in oil and gas, for example, And leaders have realized that you can't pay lip service to that transition in culture. So we were brought in by an organization last year, a super major, who realized that even though they thought that they had addressed the merging of two very different cultures, it was still causing concerns and issues in the way that the two sets of teams from different backgrounds were working together, their management systems, their way that we do things around here, their culture. It was still at odds with each other. And leaders realized that investing in more support, more help, investing in objective expertise to try and understand where the gaps were and where the opportunities were to address the issues and therefore improve morale, and to convince the team to step up and continue to contribute to the improvement culture. It took a lot more than they initially expected. So for all the leaders out there, and in answer to this theme that we've seen from a number of questions during our webinars, we can't pay lip service to morale and to culture and climate. We need to continually consider where we can improve to get people on board, to get people aligned, and to get people pulling together in the same direction.
Yeah, words of wisdom. Thank you both. And I think this will probably be our penultimate question this morning, and it's initially aimed at Tim, and it comes from Steve Harris, who's saying, in our day, we would recognise a mentor and then physically watch them and their example and extract as much value from that as possible. In a virtual world, which we're all living in right now for sure, in a virtual world, can that kind of mentor-mentee relationship be hampered, and how do you work through that, if so?
Excellent question. It can be hampered. However, as with all things continuous improvement, we can use adversity to improvise, adapt, and overcome, and we can embrace the opportunity to innovate and disrupt the way things have been done. So COVID-19 has forced all of us to reconsider and confront how things are done, given that we're not all face-to-face in the same location and won't be for quite a while. So the various virtual collaboration tools have allowed us to continue to communicate, collaborate, and cooperate through video conference and through the various platforms that we're very familiar with, including the one we're using right now. So a mentor to a mentee, it's critical for organizational development. I don't see enough of it personally in the organizations that I work with. Good leaders are well aware of the importance of succession planning and development, and therefore the importance of allocating a mentor to representatives within different departments in the organization. It also reminds me of the principle of external accountability partnership. Call it mentoring, call it coaching, call it training. Making sure that we're getting the right objectivity and expertise to lead with courage, to out the truth, to make sure that we confront current reality. So if it's a mentor to a mentee, it's actually being clear together about where the strengths and weaknesses are and where we need to improve. And so if you think about it in a virtual environment, fine, set up coaching calls or mentorship calls, whether it's once a week, once a month, whatever schedule is going to work best, and then stick to it so that the mentee feels that he or she has the support of a good mentor who's modeling the right behavior and who's genuinely interested in their development. And as I say, arguably not quite as powerful as being in the same room, where you can pick up on energy and body language in addition to verbalizing the conversation. Doing it virtually can still allow for the key elements to be involved. So, you know, expertise, objectivity, responsibility, transparency, all of these elements which can add value to a leader or a team, they can still be done virtually through video conferencing. It does hamper it slightly, but it doesn't mean that we can't continue to improve and work together. So those were some of the thoughts that came up for me, Rachel, in response to Steve Harris's question. Steve's been a real advocate of improvement. I've worked with Steve on a number of occasions. He's definitely a champion, as Murray talked about earlier. And no doubt he will be the kind of person who has adapted to the new normal that we have and is making sure that people are still being mentored virtually.
Thank you, Tim. Murray, anything to add to that in your own experience?
Yeah, actually talking to quite a few of the operators recently around Aberdeen, one of the things that's come out, you see, yeah, there's a lot of challenges having to work remotely, but they've actually found that quite a few of their leaders are more accessible now than they used to be. So where they were in, you know, wall-to-wall meetings all day was pretty normal pre-COVID. The guys are obviously still very busy, but yeah, but they've found them to be more accessible. So it may well be that you get a 20-minute chat when your boss is in his kitchen of an evening, but it's still a valuable chat. So I guess my advice would be almost, again, being the eternal optimist, turn it to your advantage. It may be people you would see as a mentor or somebody that you could learn from is accessible now. So take the chance. Pick up the phone and ask them, would they be willing to do it? And I know from personal experience, it's very valuable. I took a chance a few years ago in an organization I was with, a very senior leader. I was really keen for his advice. I admired him. I admired the way he dealt with people. He has fantastic people skills. And luckily he said, yeah, he would. But he said it's a two-way process. I'm not just going to mentor you, you're going to mentor me, which was utterly terrifying when he said it. But you know, it became actually a really good relationship over the time. And the fact that somebody like that could learn from me was very powerful. So yeah, I would say you use the reality we're in right now. Take a chance. If there's somebody you admire and you think they could give you some feedback, ask.
Yeah, I guess nobody's ever offended by being asked to be a mentor. It's a real compliment, isn't it?
Yep.
So,
yep.
Thank you. Right, well, as I say, I think this might be our last question of the morning. And again, it's one of those that came through in a few of the questions that we've had in the previous two webinars, because it definitely applies to both your areas of expertise. And that is that our managers are sceptical of change programs. How can we drive performance without support?
Do you want me to start with that one, Tim?
You go first, Murray.
Shocker. Leaders sceptical of change. You know, it's not that uncommon. I guess you see all over the organisation. I've worked with plenty of organisations where the leaders have a very clear vision, but lower down the organisation, they're very sceptical. And I guess the reality is a lot of organisations have been through some sort of change process over the years. And sometimes they can be quite damaging, and people remember it was a bit of a painful process. So yeah, they can be skeptical, leaders can be skeptical. I guess from my point of view, you need your leaders to be engaged. This isn't going to work if they don't believe in it, if they don't have a genuine passion for it. So, you know, again, as Tim's mentioned before, I think one of the huge advantages having external expertise and that's of independence is it's sometimes easier for us to challenge them and talk to them and help refine and just nail down what is it you're trying to achieve. Sometimes that's harder in the organization because you're looking over your shoulder for your future or even your job at this time, the way things are. But yeah, you do need them bought in. But I think, again, you know, if we can help scope out what you actually mean by this change, how that's going to work for the organization, what's the prize, what's the benefit for the sort of general worker in the organization, you know, rather take it from just a great corporate vision to what does it mean for me. I guess that's my experience, is people are fairly selfish at the front line. They want to know, what does it mean for me? How's it going to change for me? So I guess just before I hand over for Tim, just one other little thought on that, and it's something Tim and I were speaking about a few days ago. As part of that engagement, getting the leaders engaged and getting the workforce engaged is a core principle I was introduced to years ago of messenger environment. So be very clear in the message, and that message might change very slightly at different parts of the organization. The messenger almost certainly will. You want somebody with credibility at a local level that can go out and share that message. And the environment is absolutely critical. There's no point in calling guys off the plant into the boardroom because they will not be comfortable and they will not be receptive. The leader presenting the message, he's probably super comfortable, but that's not the point of it. Go to the T-shack, go to the control room, go out in the plant and present the message there where the guys are comfortable and they're receptive. And again, the senior leader, the CEO, may not be the right guy to share the message down in the T-shack. Find somebody that they'll listen to that has credibility. But yeah, you want that engagement to permeate through the organization. So if they're skeptical, yeah, we can help, we can work with them and help craft that, but you do need engaged leaders for sure. Tim, you're our leadership guru.
I would completely agree and add that we actually embrace and enjoy some constructive, healthy criticism, questioning or cynicism at the start of an improvement initiative when we're supporting teams. It means that there's some engagement, there's some interest. The worst thing is when you get apathy and people just aren't interested or engaged and aren't participating. So some healthy skepticism is actually appreciated and welcomed. And I know that good leaders have that view. It's key that, of course, key leaders are on board and are committed and are setting the example, standing up at town halls and workshops to get these managers, skeptical managers, bought in, engaging with them, listening to them, as we've talked about before. So we really want to convert the cynics to champions. We talked about champions before. Healthy skeptical cynicism is okay as long as over time we see leaders engaging and enrolling those managers from cynic to champion, as I say. Every now and then you get individuals that get left behind by an improving climate, and that's just the reality. Striving for excellence is not for everyone. That's just the brutal reality. What tends to happen is that those that don't want to get on board with an initiative which has a clear purpose of getting the team better and for striving for upper quartile results, is that certain individuals, they don't like that environment, they choose to move elsewhere, and that's just the brutal reality. They're just being honest about that. However, 9 times out of 10, we see some healthy pushback, and then people going, okay, at least I'm being listened to. The initiative is taking into account my real concerns based on a lot of experience. And so based on that, and based on the fact that I'm seeing that I'm making a contribution to this initiative, we see those managers often becoming great leaders for the cause of continuous improvement.
Great. Okay, thank you, Tim. So that kind of wraps up our questions, if we're to keep to our promise of being 45 minutes on time. But before we finish up, I know that you guys have some information you want to actually share on screen with everyone, which I suspect is going to be of interest. So, Murray, are you wanting to?
No, spot on, Rachel. So I'll touch on this first. Hopefully you can see a slide up. So what we wanted to do is offer a no obligation session to help your leadership team to regroup and refocus as we emerge from lockdown. So we've got a fairly well-used checklist here that we've seen add value for successful teams. So it's some fairly obvious points. Based on our experience, these tend to work. So making sure that you have the leadership team included in the conversation, and that's the wider leadership team. So we've talked about listening and enrollment and engagement. It's important to discuss the challenges of the current reality. And funnily enough, I'm actually heading over to Denmark next week to work with a client at a leadership session on exactly this principle of understand the current reality, understand the challenges, discuss those challenges, and then moving forward, clarify the purpose and the plan, clarify where we're going to, and obviously key leaders play a key role in this. Consider a climate survey where we are asking for input based on some structured, appropriate questions to get from the team through that survey where they see the challenges and opportunities, and then collaborate, as we'll be doing next week on this workshop, collaborate to progress and improve. So establish a journey to get from your current reality to your desired future, your desired vision. And indeed, with all of this, consider a deliberate initiative to stay on track. You don't need to outsource, but consider objective external expertise to support your team in staying on track. And as we've mentioned a few times today, I think it's critical to really consider getting deliberate about improvement rather than just leaving it to chance or assuming that everyone has your perspective on getting better. Because I've worked with many, many leaders who have realized that even though they know what's happening during the forthcoming phase, that doesn't mean that everyone else does. And the reason we have continuous improvement activities like planning meetings and reviews, etc., is to leave nothing to chance and make sure that everyone is on board with the vision and the plan and the journey. Murray, what would you add to that?
Probably just add one point, Tim, and it's really on the top bullet point there. We've had some tremendous feedback from the webinars over the last couple of months, and one of the questions that comes up is, how do I now go and spread the word? How do I engage my peers and my leadership? And I guess that was the whole point of this offer, is we will happily sit down, have this, as Tim says, no obligation session, happily sit down with you, a few of your peers, a few of your leaders, and actually just continue the conversation. Let's share some of the issues that are real to you. We're more than happy to contribute how we think we can help you move forward with that. But sometimes just that discussion lights the fire, gets that first step in kicking off an improvement effort within your organization.
Yeah, brilliant, Murray. And so if you want to be part of the performance conversation or to get in touch with us, to anyone on this webinar, then emails are there, but also available on LinkedIn, obviously. And we're passionate about this stuff. We'd love to engage with your team and have a chat with you if you'd like to get in touch. And with that, Rachel, I will unshare my screen and hand back to you for the conclusion.
Great, well, that sounds like a bit of a no-brainer of an offer to me, certainly. So I hope you get some good uptake on that. So thank you, Tim and Murray, for this third session. I don't know if there'll be a fourth, we shall discuss in due course. And thank you to everybody who attended this morning. We appreciate you coming along. Have a great day, all of you. Bye.
Thanks a lot, Rachel. Cheers,
Bye.
everyone.